Chapter 13. Ein settled in fairly quickly over the week that passed in the village. Every day he and the Swords of Darkness, along with Britta, stopped in to check on Faya, and every day he said, "Just one more day, this is amazing." Heinz didn't really mind, it was just the break he needed. Much to his surprise, however, Lupus Regina seemed to be taking a liking to the blonde village girl he'd rescued on his first venture out. Henry seemed oblivious to Lupus's hidden sadistic nature, but not to the constant teasing of the red-haired battle maid. Almost every time he saw the pair, Henry was blushing, and Lupus Regina was laughing, though Faya was not immune to the taunts of the battle maid, and she often managed to con one or the other into a compromising position. It was a non-issue to Heinz as long as the client didn't complain, so he let it pass while he watched the villagers live their lives. Britta took to assisting with the hunting when not working with the other adventurers, and the lot of them began spending more time with Henry's summoned goblins. Initially skeptical, he was watching on the 8th day with Lupus Regina when she asked, "Moman, how come you find them so interesting? I mean, they're just humans and goblins, right?" She scratched her head with sharp, jerking motions of her hand that made Heinz think of the way a dog might have, and he let a light chuckle of his own pass without comment. "Yes, they are," he explained with the noble voice he still hadn't gotten used to having, "but that is part of what makes them interesting. In Yggdrasil there was often discrimination and even hatred between different beings, and in the other world, it wasn't much different." "First world?" Lupus Regina asked with wide blinking eyes. She was, if possible, even more attentive when she stared up at him, secure in his shared humanity with the villagers. He had his armor on, but helmet off, though it was secure under his arm when he looked down to her. "First world?" He repeated the question back to her. "The world the supreme beings would go to when not in Nazarick," she explained, and it hit him. Of course, they would have seen us come and go, perhaps remembering something of their time in Yggdrasil. They don't know it was just a game. To them, it was their world. Heinz understood, and it prompted him to derail her question with one of his own. "What do you remember of those days, Lupu?" he asked, keeping to the adventurer name to ensure it remained habitual. Her yellow eyes were bright and happy when she answered. "Lots of things. I remember watching my younger sisters be born. I remember the day of the Great Invasion. Fighting our way back and keeping the invaders busy to buy time for our creators. Seeing you arrive, the fighting retreat, the death of Aura and Mare. Then after, seeing them remade by the will of their creator. So many moments shine bright as the daylight we're standing in." Lupus Regina's enthusiasm became reverence, and drifted slowly towards sadness. "When they one by one, the supreme beings said goodbye and vanished, I wanted to ask my maker, Beast King Mekongawa, how I let him down the day he said goodbye, but for some reason." Her head hung like a dog caught in the midst of mischief. "I couldn't speak." "What did we do wrong, Merman?" she asked, using the name with the same reverence she would have used calling him Master or My Lord in Nazarick. "We all kind of ask that to ourselves." "Nothing," Heinz answered with absolute confidence that bordered on anger. His body tensed up. It was like listening to a child ask why their mother or father didn't love them. Only once had he felt anger at his friends, anger he knew was unfair, that they left for the real world. Now, that anger returned in force, that they were so cruel as to abandon their children. Again, he knew, that isn't fair. They were just NPCs back then, not alive. Not like they are now. But it didn't dissipate as easily as his prior moment of frustration. Chiefly because, as he saw it, there was a sad child looking up at him and hoping for answers he couldn't begin to give. He put a hand on her head and suppressed the urge to say good dog. Instead he chose to say, "Nothing. You did nothing wrong. Things happened, and they had to go. There was nothing you could have done to make them stay." Lupus Regina closed her eyes and raised up a little on her tiptoes to press her head a little more firmly into his hand, a very canine gesture if ever Heinz had seen one. But she didn't say anything else. He was the first to break the silence, shifting the subject. "In what you call First World, different peoples often fought one another. In this one, things are often the same if the slain Theocracy, Beastman Kingdom, and Draconic Kingdom are any indication. I wondered if the villagers would accept the goblins. They have, and now it makes more sense. Goblins didn't kill their neighbors, humans did. And because the villagers accept them, the adventurers do." "Wouldn't the adventurers hate goblins, though?" Lupus Regina asked, remaining on tiptoe until a disappointed pout took over her face when Ainsley's hand withdrew. Perhaps, but adventurers travel a great deal, exposed widely to others, their minds are more open. A closed-minded adventurer is a poor one. They don't see possibilities that someone else might be open to, and so seeing the way the goblins work with the villagers and everyone at ease, it is much easier for them to settle into normalcy. Ainsley explained, they may not be much, but they work hard, and are dedicated, so that gives them value. I understand, Moman, but I still want to play with them. Lupus Regina's wolfish, sadistic smile took over for a moment, sending a shiver down Ainsley's spine. I am also one of them now, you know. He reminded her, and she shot her eyes up to him and gave her head a tiny shake. You are the one who stayed. No matter what else you are that first. Her yellow eyes glittered with devotion, and against that he could say nothing, though his disturbance at her desire to treat humans as toys had not left him. It was then that they spotted Henry Emmett coming around a corner to oversee the construction of a new home in place of one that had been reduced to a burnt-out husk of fallen timbers and toppled stone. The door frame stood, but the rest was nearly gone or shattered to the ground. The change in Lupus Regina was not physical, but he felt it nonetheless. Is she your friend? Ainsley inquired as a father might ask his child after seeing them with someone after their first day of school. Kinda. She's fun to tease. She makes cute noises and blushes like a cherry. Lupus Regina replied with a mild laugh. I see. Well, I do intend to have this village protected, so we'll add her to the list of those whose lives I will guarantee. Ainsley promised. Now go, play, have a little fun, he said, feeling very much the parent when Lupus Regina turned invisible and began to creep up on the unwary Henry. Left alone for the moment, the smell of hot meat and vegetables wafted towards Ainsley's nose. He sniffed the air and followed it, encouraged by the growling in his stomach. Lupus Regina waited until Henry was done with her work and the rebuilding was well underway, then followed her. Undetectable by an ordinary human girl, it was child's play to watch until the blonde was alone with Nfea. As soon as the pair was by themselves and Nfea began to stammer and sweat as he tried to have a normal conversation with the girl he loved, Lupus Regina snatched his hand and as if it belonged to her, then used it to swat Henry directly on her ass. The blonde peasant jumped immediately, and somewhat impressively and spun around to stare open-mouthed at her friend. Nfea, she shouted. Ah, I didn't. I wasn't. I swear. Sweat was already springing up, and it became a river. Lupus Regina let Nfea take back control of his hand and he stared at it. I lost control. I didn't mean to. It felt like someone grabbed me. He took a step back, and the shock on Henry's face became understanding. Come out here, Lupu. I know it was you. Henry put her hands on her hips and looked around rapidly. The red-haired battle-maid crept behind Henry, blew softly on her rear and whispered, How do you know? Henry jumped with a loud, eep, and spun around again, putting her hands protectively over her derriere. When she landed, however, Lupus Regina had already begun pointing at the blushing pair and laughing so loud she arched her back and faced the sky. Your faces. You two look so ridiculous. So ridiculous. You're redder than cherries, and that's saying something, given that you're both cherries, Lupu exclaimed while she cried tears of laughter. Damn it, Lupu, Henry said, what's gotten into you? Just helping young lovers. Lupu answered when she managed to stop her laughing and wiped a remaining tear from her eye. Really, you two should just do it already. Henry and Nfea looked at one another, and never had the young man been so glad of the hair hanging down in front of him. Henry, however, turned her eyes back to Lupus Regina and said flatly, Lupu, it's not like that, he's my best friend, I've known him since I was little. Yeah, so. Lupus Regina gave a full-body shrug with her arms out and shook her head. I swear, it's like everybody in this world is denser than rocks. You're a village girl, who do you think you're going to marry? Me? That old mare guy? Everybody else you know is either dead, young enough to make you a pedo if you try, old enough to be your father, already married, or a girl. And you're pretty, but not my type. Besides, I'm a Mimidoshi, I know lots of practical stuff, and I know that unless it's just business, you're supposed to be like best friends with your mate. Silly virgin. Besides, he's game, just look. Lupus Regina said and pointed. The pair had been blushing the entire time, but Henry followed the path of Lupus Regina's arm, past the tip of her finger and all the way down to Nfea's very, very obvious erection. Henry brought her hands up to cover her mouth. "Nfea," she exclaimed. "Oh, don't be that way," Lupus Regina said. "You're a pretty girl and he's a young man. What do you think he is, made of stone? Maybe a bit is, but not the rest. I've done my work for now, so toodles." Lupus Regina winked at him and began to sashay away, cocky smile plastered on her face. "It's up to you now, boyo, don't screw her up," Lupus Regina whispered when she was passing Nfea. When she was gone, Nfea looked down and held his hands together like he was worried she'd appear and take control of one of them again. "Hey, sorry about that." "It's fine, she's a strange one," Henry replied and looked past him to be sure the beautiful, shapely back of the cleric was still in retreat. "But still, strange or not." Henry looked down again. Nfea's hands hung down in front of his manhood. "She's not lying, is she?" "No," Nfea finally whispered. This is a lot to take in, Nfe. Can I ask you to wait?" Henry asked, and to that Nfea could do nothing but nod. "You don't like traveling much, do you, Khajiit?" Clementine asked on their third night of travel. "No," the old man answered. Every hated inch of road was more dust on his dark red robes, every step, a hated moment wasted in anticipation of the fulfillment of his plans. "Oh, come on," Clementine said, "the air doesn't stink, you've got that big sky up there, what's not to love? You spend enough time in those dusty crypts, you'll turn into a corpse yourself." Khajiit didn't take the bait, he only took another bite of plain bread. "I like crypts and tombs," he finally answered. "I don't like villages, I grew up in one of those, they're trash places, good only for harvesting." Clementine didn't think of anything to say to that, and they went to bed shortly after. There wasn't a need, she didn't much care for the places either, recalling how ugly village life was herself. Stupid parents, stupid brother, stupid village. Just 1 or 2 more days of travel, snatch the brat, kill the rest, and then I get to watch a city die. What fun. Although, maybe I can kill off the whole village too. We only need the one brat, why not wipe out the rest? Villages are disgusting places, every one of them just like home. They can all just die. Clementine cursed everyone she knew from her own village, and she did it by name. Then for the 1000th time, she cursed the black scripture instructor who raped her when she was still learning. Then as Clementine's last act before every rest, she counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. She mentally counted out every time she got the chance to do the penetrating, and finally fell asleep when she hit the number that had finally killed him. Chapter 14. They arrived on the outskirts of Kani village on their 6th day of travel. For a man so eager to get somewhere, he sure does walk slow. Clementine thought, neglecting at least partially on purpose that he was both an old man and a magic caster, not an adventurer, merchant, nor a young man accustomed to long walks. "We're here," she said when they crested the hill and found themselves staring down at the village. "Do you know how to find the boy?" Khajiit asked her, and Clementine reached up with one hand and tapped her nose. "Sure thing, Khajiit," she said in tandem with the tap. The woman smelled like more than just old woman, it smelled like an alchemy lab. "All I have to do is find that smell, and I'll know where he works and probably where he lives." "Fine, but what about the village? Strange that they should have a wall, very strange. What if there's trouble to be found here?" Khajiit asked with a narrow look down at the little place. The wall was simple spiked wooden logs, each one roughly as tall as 2 people standing one on top of the other. In addition, there was a watchtower with somebody in it, 4 of them in fact, facing each direction by what were likely the entrance gates. Clementine glanced down at him. Even in the dark she could see that his gnarled old hands were white at the knuckles where he was clutching his staff. "You worry too much. Between the 2 of us, we can handle anything, and walls go both ways. Sure, it is supposed to keep people out, but it also keeps them in," Clementine pointed out. "I'll sneak in, then you just conjure up a few undead at one gate, then I'll grab the brat, and go out the other. Easy." Khajiit considered her suggestion. It had merit. It wasn't entirely quiet, but it didn't need to be. Plus it was difficult to ignore the appeal of more death that would come from his undead rampaging through a defenseless village. The promise of more corpses was far, far too alluring to ignore. "Go." Khajiit finally muttered, "Signal me when you need the distraction." Khajiit watched as the woman leaned into her run, sprinting over the ground toward the walls. Definitely a black scripture. He acknowledged her skills privately and reached into his robe to remove the orb of death. The few passengers along the road that fell victim to himself and Clementine would likely never be missed, and they provided him with additional negative energy to use at need. It still felt like a shame to waste it, but the chance at bringing death to a whole village was just wonderful, and that would make up the difference anyway. "Will you be returning to Nazareth tonight, Momen?" Lupus Regina asked with a look in her eyes that suggested she wanted to say more. "No, this is important to my future plans," Hines answered, but it was an incomplete answer, and he knew it. "I also don't think I'm ready to face them all yet." She silently nodded and went to the small cook fire in the corner and stirred the cast iron pot. "Forgive my humble attempts at cooking, but for now this is the best I can do," she answered. He could see the darting way her eyes went from him to the food. His insistence on informality grated on her more than a little. "She is the best at it, though. Plus her little games with the peasant I rescued seem to be bearing fruit. Protect his girlfriend and he will be grateful. The deeper his loyalty, the harder he will work and the more he can be trusted." It was still an unhappy thought, and it made him recall the anguish of his own uncertainty. "Master." Lupus Regina stopped dead. She sniffed the air coming in through the window. Her sudden formality and tension would have told him enough, but his own level 100 senses were alert, and he began to stand. "I feel it too," he whispered, then pointed toward the door. "Go." Imes yawned against his will and reached for his helmet. Lupus Regina sprinted out the door and followed her nose. She exited the little hut just in time to see the blonde woman sailing over the wall, then land rolling in the dirt without stopping. Lupus Regina narrowed her eyes. "That's not bad, not great, but not bad, a damn sight better than the rest of the adventurers I got to play with," she thought and watched as the woman slipped around the village going door to door. Not to break in, but only stopping, then moving on. "Looking for someone, but nobody here is really important, except..." Understanding hit Lupus Regina, and a wolfish smile appeared on her face. She went straight to the house of Henry and Namu Emmett. "She's looking for him. But he's not home." Lupus Regina chuckled. The smell of sex in Henry's house was impossible to miss, and she privately resolved, whenever I get a chance, I should look in on them some more. When the battlemaid reached the house, she slipped in through a small window and crawled along the floor. The faint sound of womanly moans came from beyond a closed door. "Guess I can't call them virgins anymore," Lupus Regina said, and maintained her undetectable status in the corner. She listened in, enjoying her lewd and strictly necessary eavesdropping. She knew it wouldn't be long before the blonde woman found this place, not if her nose alone was good enough to detect her target. Clementine felt annoyance rise up in her like nothing else when she looked down at the empty bed. "Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! Did I miss him again?" she screamed in annoyance. It had already taken far longer than she thought it should have to complete her objective. But she did learn one thing. She stared in disbelief at the head on the counter. The wise king of the forest. Somebody killed it. That thing has taken down entire orichalcum teams and even a few adamantite-ranked adventurers. Somebody killed it? And if they did, why is it here? Clementine felt a sort of rare anxiety. Only a handful of warriors were her equal in the world, and she knew all of their names, and was personally acquainted with a few of them. If one of them killed it, and is still here, that could be a problem. She reached for a chair, broke the leg off, tore a sheet, and then took up a bottle of clear liquid, sniffed it to ensure it was alcohol, and then soaked the improvised torch. A quick spark from her flint and it was lit. As soon as Clementine left the house, she threw the torch as high and far into the air as she could in Khajiit's direction. She then resumed her house-to-house search, more quickly than before, until she found the house with the alchemical smell, and heard the moans within. Instantly, she understood. Ooh, fun, he found himself some little village slut to pound, lucky him. Well, I hope he finishes quickly, because he's almost out of time. Clementine's bemused smile became vicious when she found the window open. Stupid. Even his grandmother was more cautious than that. She didn't snort with derision, but she felt it at the thought. She climbed in, shimming through the small square, then down to the floor and over to the door. She pressed her ear against the wood. The smell of sex and alchemical ingredients was coming from inside. Maybe one more minute. Clementine kept the chuckle to herself, and waited. Henry rocked her hips back and forth over her first lover. Though she'd been inexperienced before, a farm girl is never completely innocent. Seeing the couplings of many beasts, living in small houses with parents that did as parents do to become parents, total innocence was unlikely for anyone. But the experience proved entirely novel, and she found she enjoyed it a great deal. Shyness was long gone as she rode her lover to her eighth climax of the evening, and finally, at last, collapsed on him when she felt his own pleasure crest. Their bodies were slick with sweat from their exertions, and she sighed as she clung to him. He was breathing harder than she, but when she kissed him, he reciprocated with greater passion as well. "It feels like I've waited for that for a lifetime," Nfea said happily. "Why didn't you ever tell me you were in love with me?" Henry asked when she held his eyes in hers, illuminated only by a small candle. The fire danced in the reflection of one another's eyes. Because he was a weakling. Neither Henry nor Nfea had spoken, and for a moment each thought the other had. Shock formed on both faces at once and they turned their eyes to the open door. The candle illuminated a slender blonde woman with a bare midriff, strange leather armor covered in various adventurer plates, and holding a stiletto in hand. She had a vicious smile plastered on her face and tapped it on her cheek. "Be grateful, I let you finish first. Call it a last favor from one woman to another. But I'm afraid that's the last bit of pleasure for you, girl. I need the boy, I don't need you. So." She raised her empty hand and wiggled her fingers. "Bye-bye then." "What you doing there?" Lupus Regina whispered into the blonde woman's ear just as abject terror appeared on the young couple's faces. Clementine whirled around ready to strike, only to find the impossible. Her thrust was stopped dead by a tanned open hand. "Bad girl. Those aren't your toys. Play with your own things," Lupus Regina said, then closed her hand around the wrist of the still disbelieving, staring blonde, and yanked. Clementine smashed through the thin walls of the house. The shock and disbelief hurt more than the blows themselves as she went sailing into the night air after the thunderous crash. She heard the sounds of alarm being raised and the moans of zombies already beginning as Khajiit began his part. "Damn it!" Clementine groused and flipped herself over to land and slide on her feet over the ground until she could form a crouch again. The red-headed woman was quiet, and strong, and clearly dangerous. More worrying to Clementine though was, who is she? I should know everybody capable of doing anything like that. But I don't recognize her at all. The woman emerged, stepping over the rubble of the ruined house and dusting herself off. "If this were my maid outfit, I'd tear your throat out for getting it dirty," the redhead said to her. Behind the woman, Clementine could see her target, the woman he'd been screwing, and a little girl frantically trying to understand what was happening and throwing on clothes while they tried to work out whether to flee or where to go if they did. "Bitch. You may be strong, and quiet, but I'm a legend." Clementine snarled. "You're some nobody. Get out of my way." She snarled. "Do that, and I'll leave you alone. I only want the boy." "My name is Lupu, but I guess bitch isn't totally wrong, if you think about it," Lupus Regina said and laughed uproariously at a joke that Clementine couldn't quite grasp. The woman who called herself Lupa went on. "Afraid I can't do that. You see, we're supposed to protect that one, and that means I'm going to have to kill you, or take you alive. But either way, you're not leaving." "The undead! The undead!" Shouting and screaming carried up all over the village as people rushed to the alarms of the watching goblins. "What the hell is happening?" Peter shouted in response to the alarm. His team was already throwing on their armor and readying for the fight while the goblins bought them precious minutes. "Why are the undead here?" Britta shouted while she secured her belt. "We can worry about that later, but we've got to go," Luke Root shouted as he ran out the door with Diane and Nina following hot on his heels. "We're earning our coin today," Nina shouted as encouragingly as she could, and stopped cold. She'd expected to see Momin and Lupu at the gate, but the first thing she saw amidst the light of villagers running with torches beneath the light of the moon, was Lupu facing off against someone who was clearly not undead. The attacker was clearly beyond the realm of heroes, darting in to finish Lupu off, only to be battered aside like an ant. "Lupu is playing with her? She's playing with someone moving so fast I can't even see her. Come on." Nina looked up when the voice reached her ear and a large hand rested on her shoulder. She looked up to the towering figure of Momin. "We have to protect the village. The majestic voice all but melted her on the spot, only to reform itself into iron conviction. If my home had a hero like this, my sister. Nina had the momentary selfish thought, and it redoubled her own resolve over Lupu's advice, and she leapt to follow Momon's lead. Zombies were climbing over the walls despite the goblins' best efforts. The gate was giving way. Thunderous bashing and smashing from the stronger undead that cared nothing for injuries, slowly began to force it to give way. Lucrut was shooting arrow after arrow and hitting his mark. Dine's plants were holding the undead in place. Peter lopped off heads. Nina added her magic arrows to the defense, and villagers gathered to protect their own, shooting arrows as best they could. It would not be enough for long. Stand back from the gate. They heard the powerful shout of Momon, stand out of the way. They're going to break through. Ainz felt the very human fear rise with the stink of death, but thanks to the stats of his warrior body, it passed away almost instantly as the fear resistance kicked in. The cracks, thunks, and tears redoubled, almost like the undead understood they were going to break through. However, because of his orders, the goblins and the humans alike began to fall back. Hold them back from climbing over the wall. I will take care of the rest. Ainz gave the order. There's over 100 of them out there. You can't possibly handle so many, Britta shouted. Ainz drew his two great swords. 50 swings each, he snapped, and then the gate burst open. The villagers cried out with alarm, and then watched in disbelief as the hero in black armor charged alone. The swords swung wide and swift, bodies were knocked to pieces, shattered, rotted heads spun away and bodies fell without them. I'm seeing a legend being born. The Battle of Kani. Where one warrior destroyed. How many are there even? Britta recognized, and nor was she alone. The dark hero disappeared from view and the flow of undead over the walls began to falter. We're going to live, people said, and then they heard the crash at their backs. They turned en masse, and Nina recalled the sight she'd put out of her mind a moment ago. Clementine wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. I'm going to kill you. You said that, but as far as I can see, you're only killing time, and you're even doing a pitiful job at that. Lupu responded and tapped her foot. Really, I was almost impressed at you, but you're just a one-trick pervert. Did you develop all those skills just to listen to people screw? Bitch. You'll pay for that, Clementine shouted, and opened her arms. I'm beyond human limits. I kill and kill and kill and nobody can stop me. Everyone fears me. I can rob the treasures of cardinals and the homes of mages. I'm death itself. HMPF, little people often lift themselves by claiming lofty titles. But I see nothing special about you. Saying you're beyond human limits. That's like saying you've got bigger boobs than a loli. Who cares? Lupu mocked her and Clementine's face went red with rage. I will show you what that really means, Clementine said, and crouched down. Fucking bitch. She groused, and began to activate her martial arts. Chapter 15. The dead fell with absurdities to Ainz's blades, though he could feel the eyes watching him when people and goblins returned to the walls. Make my name a legend, and I can do damn near anything. He thought as he put the last of them down. A few hundred undead were nothing, but the XP did add up, even if it was almost nothing individually. Am I getting a little more because it is a mob? He wondered, but then focused on the real question. There's no chance that this is a mere coincidence. That one Lupus Regina is dealing with is a fighter of some sort, not a mage. People who can do both are exceptionally rare, even non-existent other than myself. So she has a caster as a partner. A necromancer, no less. Ainz's time as a gamer told him that much beyond doubt, leaving only the question of where they would be located. Behind him he could hear the crash of another home being demolished. Lupus Regina is playing with her food again. The thought almost made him laugh while he scanned the area. He called on his experience as a guild leader and surveyed the landscape. They could be anywhere, but where are they likely to be? He asked himself and immediately ruled out the forest, even with a good view of the gate. That was literally all. No line of sight to their partner or any idea what else was happening inside the village itself. That left one obvious position right away that offered a way to see what the undead were doing and let them see inside. The hill. He turned his eyes in that direction, and sure enough, a small figure stood, visible to him only because of his high stats. He sheathed his swords to give himself just a little more speed, just in case the person was faster than he expected, and began to sprint. Clementine thrust again and again as fast and hard as she could, yet her blows were battered away by the one calling herself Lupa with a single flick of her wrists. How is this even possible? She is a human, right? The question hadn't been seriously intended, but once the seed was planted, it began to grow. Really, is this the best you can do? I'm disappointed, really I am. I've seen better out of so many other lesser beings, Lupus Regina said and folded her hands behind her head. She let out a sigh that was clearly intended to taunt. Clementine's eyes, already narrow and full of hate, darted around. Others were starting to gather. None of them meant anything, they were weaklings, but it meant something worse. She glanced past Lupu, and the woman picked up on her shifted attention. Oh, them? You really didn't notice? Wow, you suck. Yeah, Moman took care of them. He's probably already on the way to take care of whoever you used to create all that rotten meat. He might be a little cross with you for using the bodies of the families here though. He's gotten to kind of like these folks, Lupu said, and the villagers stared at one another in horror, open-mouthed, and in many cases, weeping when they understood what Lupu had just told them all. I'll end their misery once I've ended you. Clementine snarled, her bosom heaved with deep breaths. One poke is all it takes. Tell it to the lover boy back there. Lupu jabbed her thumb over to where Henry and Nfaya stood. How can anyone? How is this even possible? Nfaya ignored the joke thrown in his direction. He shared the thought with the rest of the villagers. The zombies and other undead were reduced to hunks of meat, and in front of them all an impossible fight was being waged. Lupu seemed to be utterly indifferent in the face of a monster, and more importantly, utterly untouchable by it. You can only mock someone so much. Clementine glared. Yeah, eventually I'm going to have to kill you. I'm just waiting for Moman's word. Or you could surrender. I could use a pet. Though I guess I'd have to housebreak you. Can't have you sniffing around places you shouldn't. Lupus Regina's mockery redoubled and made the blonde howl with rage and charge again. What are you? Who are you? Khajiit yelled while the Dark Warrior rushed him. He put up wall after wall of skeletons, raised undead, and sent off acid and fire attacks. But the warrior avoided most and simply bashed through the skeletal walls or literally slapped the undead aside and put them down with that alone. Stronger than you, and nobody you'd know, nobody you need to know. A name is meaningless to the dead, Ainz declared and drew his twin blades as he came close. Skeletal dragons, Khajiit shouted, holding aloft a dark orb in hand. That set the warrior jumping backward, and relief flooded the long face of the red-robed caster. You're right to be afraid. Even one would require a team of adamantite adventurers, and I've summoned two, and you're alone. You handled low-ranked undead easily enough. And this is a setback. But it's all over now. You'll die here, Clementine will kill the rest of the village, and it will all be over. Ainz looked up to the sky, true to Khajiit's word. Two skeletal dragons flapped bone wings and bone tails. A near-splitting roar led to shouts of alarm in return. Okay, so this is different. Ainz begrudgingly admitted. I wonder if they're as weak as they were in the game. Clementine got up to her feet, her ears rang where Lupu slapped her. The bitch actually slapped me. Me. It was a galling thought, but the roar splitting the air and the alarm of those who watched her humiliation was a comfort. You're done for now. I'll never admit this to Khajiit, but his magic is really good. Your warrior friend is done for. How will he face two skeletal dragons? Hadn't you better start running? Since you did so well, I'll even give you a head start. Clementine gestured to the wall and she waited for the panic to ensue. The villagers and petty adventurers looked like they were about to break. No way, Henry shouted her defiance when she felt Nfaya's confident arm around her waist holding her a little closer. We're not running. This is our home. You're not going to kill us. You're not going to burn it. Nobody will ever take from us again. Clementine glared at the blonde peasant. When I finish with her. You're next. You don't have a chance, Nfaya said with utter confidence. Nope, not even one. See, that warrior is a lot stronger than me. I'm not even a warrior, I'm a cleric, Lupa said with a cocky grin and a raised chin, daring Clementine to disbelieve her. It was a dare Clementine accepted. Bullshit, she spat into the dirt. I'll prove it, Lupa said and raised a hand, and in Clementine's eyes, did the stupid and the impossible both at once. The healing light hit Clementine worse than a physical blow, not because it didn't work, but because it did. How? How? You can't be this strong and use magic like this. It's not fair. You're breaking the rules. See, all better, now I can play with you again. Lupu clapped her hands together with excitement and a giggle, and then took the offensive. She hit home before Clementine could even raise an effort at self-defense. The back of Lupu's hand connected to Clementine's jaw and flipped the woman end over end 6 times in the air before the blonde woman landed face first in the dirt. Khajiit extended a hand toward the Dark Warrior when the skeletal dragons descended to guard him. Surrender, and I'll let you serve me. His aged voice was almost raspy, his long face and bald head made him look almost cartoonishly villainish. An absurd notion on its face even if things were not as Ainz knew them to be. No, I'd rather use these as an experiment. Ainz answered, and advanced at Khajiit slowly enough to allow one of the massive beasts, easily 50 times Ainz's size, to bar the way. The claw came out to stop, and possibly grip, Ainz's body, and his sword came out to strike it. Khajiit's jaw dropped, the bones shattered like icicles hit by stones, the fragments fell down, and the warrior swung again before those fragments hit the ground. Bits of bone began to fall like snowflakes as he literally began to cut the undead monster to pieces. Go! Stop him! Khajiit screeched, sending the second skeleton into attack. For a moment everything was obscured, there was only the sound of a crash. A smile of relief began to trace over his face. So, you couldn't handle 2. He frowned. The skeletal dragon was flapping its wings, but not moving from where it impacted. What's wrong? He wondered, until the dragon roared as its arm was wrenched away from its body. That's not possible, Khajiit stammered when the dragon moved, and he saw that the sword was buried pommel up into the dirt, and the Dark Warrior grasped the skeleton, and tore the arm free. Many things that are impossible to believe, are very real. Ainz replied, and then he yanked the sword out, and proceeded to cut his way through the body of the dragon. The rain of bones continued to fall as the beast continued to flail hopelessly. Slightly stronger, but just as dumb. Without constant control, all they can do is follow their last order. A huge drawback to undead was the lack of intelligence in most of them, and these were no exception. As one dragon collapsed with a crash into the dirt road, the other advanced, and began to suffer the same fate. Khajiit held the orb in a trembling hand, ray of negative energy. He shouted the spell and black energy shot out to heal the remaining undead monster. The Dark Warrior, however, simply moved faster, and the trickle of negative healing energy that had been pulling bones back into place, simply couldn't keep up, and then gradually died out. No. 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 I refuse to believe I'll die here. 5 years of preparation. 5 years of work and death in the crypt. 5 years to destroy Erantle and achieve my fondest wish. All to die by a nobody outside of a nothing village. He shouted his rage and began using his own mana to desperately launch spell after spell. Fireballs lit up the night, but his wild desperation, which redoubled when the second skeleton crashed down, did not help his aim. The Dark Warrior was closer, advancing faster than Khajiit could respond. He opened his mouth to scream one last desperate spell and save himself from a fate he could no longer avoid, and his life flashed before his eyes. Himself, the young Khajiit, playing by the water with his friends outside of the village they were all born in. Himself and his mother having lunch, a little tiff over when he had to come home. His harsh words to her, the hurt in her eyes. His fun time playing again, but a lingering sense of guilt. A resolve to apologize. His return home. Mom, listen, I'm sorry The last words, and they died in mid-sentence when he saw her corpse lying there, dead. The guilt, an apology he could never give. Learning she died of a rare illness and needed him home so she could rest easy. The resolution, to give her back her life, no matter what. His first kill. His first spell. One after another. Joining Zuranan and rising through the ranks. Learning about the death spiral, obtaining the orb of death. The morning of the present. The sword was up, it was coming down, I have to say the spell. It's my last chance. He understood. But only one word came out. Mother. Khajiit shouted for help which had died decades earlier, and the sword severed his head from his body. He lived to see the world spinning end over end and felt the pain as he began to roll down the hill. Dust in his eyes and the taste of it on his tongue, rocks jabbing into the skin of his face. He rolled down like a ball, unable to cast a spell as he could no longer speak. He felt his consciousness fading, and a part of him wondered, will I live long enough to come to a stop? Khajiit got an answer to his question. His head finally rocked back and forth at the base of the hill, his face looking up toward the endless sky. Then his eyes began to close, and his life came to an end. That was easy, Ayn said while the head tumbled down the hill and the body toppled over. I guess that's enough, and the exp I got from those skeletal dragons was a lot better than the undead down there. He yawned heavily and looked out over the village. Lupu. Finish it, I'll be returning in a moment, Ayn shouted, and started to stroll back down the hill. When the skeletons fell from the sky, Clementine could barely believe it. Impossible, she muttered, a sentiment shared by every single observer. Nah, it's routine for someone that strong. Those were nothing, not even a warm-up, Lupu said, and then she heard her master's orders. Welp, I guess that's it for you then, playtime is over, Lupu said with a smile as sadistic as Clementine's own. The blonde crouched down. So it is, if Khajiit really failed, I'd better get going, she said, and though she kept her voice confident, when she crouched down to launch herself at the red-haired woman again, she felt the ember of fear burst into flames. Her opponent took the same posture, both legs bent, one hand on the dirt, one hand up, despite being without a weapon. She means to end it, fine, so do I, I'm beyond humanity, and she? She's just a crazy skilled copperplate nobody. Clementine meant the thought to reassure herself, and then she sprang into action. Her stiletto came out, and whooshed through open air. As expected, the woman knew how to dodge, but Clementine was confident in her experience, and had a second one in hand an instant later. She brought it out and tried to jab the redhead in her kidney. That too whooshed past, but this one went behind the woman who stepped inside Clementine's attack. The blonde black scripture was quick to try to respond by changing her grip and bringing her stilettos in, but to her horror, she felt hands holding her arms, and squeezed. Her bones snapped under Lupu's hold, and her will to fight snapped with them. Clementine let out a wail of pain. She kicked and struggled, trying to escape. Run. Run. This is a monster. A monster. A monster. It's not a human after all. Get out of here. Go. Go. Clementine told herself, but the monster that held her broken arms was now lifting her up. Well, that's it for you, I don't really need you, any purpose you had, you've already served, so. To use your words, bye-bye. Lupu was grinning up at her, licking her lips. How the redhead intended to kill her, Clementine didn't know, she barely listened to what was being said, but understanding dawned when she began to feel the slow, steady pull on her arms and felt the fingers of the redhead tearing into her flesh. No. No. No please. Clementine whimpered and cried as all her courage and will to cruelty died with the feeling of the pull on her arms. Her flesh began to slowly tear away. The ripping that sounded like paper tearing continued with agonizing slowness. The cruel yellow eyes of the woman that Clementine recognized too late to be that of a true monster, bored into her. Then she felt it, the feeling of falling. Clementine collapsed when she hit the dirt and landed on her back. Up above her, she could see that Lupu still held her arms in the air. I kind of thought one would tear before the other. Oh well, I should have taken bets, Lupu mumbled, then raised a foot and stomped on Clementine's ankle while the woman on her back in the dust struggled to kick herself away from the horror of her own demise. The ankle shattered, but the pain was less than which shot from where her shoulders used to be. Clementine rolled over onto her belly, and began wiggling, crawling on it as she threw away the last bit of pride to put just one more inch between herself and the one to take her life and her pride and grind both down into nothingness. You made a bad mistake, and you don't get to learn from it. Lupu muttered, approached, and put her foot on Clementine's back. The former black scripture felt the foot on her back, pressing her breasts down, grinding them painfully into the dirt, adding one more final agony. The wave of cheers from her would-be victims hit her like one last insult and she thought, as her brain finally began to die, this has been the worst day of my life. Then it was her last, and Clementine died.